So I know that I normally post cosplay sewing tutorials, but I also pole dance. And I love all of my amazing, beautiful, sparkly pole shoes. So I wanted to show other dancers how I make these custom fit covers so that we can all protect our beautiful, expensive shoes. You don't need much for this project at all. Just some vinyl, your outside fabric, masking tape, a ruler, and some interfacing or tracing paper, and then lastly but not pictured will be some really wide and thick elastic. Take your tracing material and tape it around the platform of your shoe. Then we're going to take a pen and mark along the top edge of the platform and the bottom edge of the platform. Then you're also going to need to mark the back of the shoe where you're going to want the elastic to be. You want to make sure that you mark the center front of your shoe. This is easy on this shoe because it's a split shoe, so it's obvious where the center line is, but just do your best to guess. Now we're going to make a pattern for the toe. Cover the toe in masking tape and use the edge of the tape to determine the shape you want or draw it on with a pen. You can see that I use the tape to determine the top edge of the toe cover, but trace the bottom seam where the toe and the platform connect. You will also want to make sure that you mark the center again at the bottom edge of the toe, which I forgot to do. And also wrap the platform pattern back around the shoe and mark where your top edge of the toe cover will meet the platform on both sides. Now you can peel your toe pattern off of your shoe. If you have patent shoes like these or a fabric that you're worried about damaging, I definitely recommend buying the yellow or the green frog tape because it's less sticky than regular masking tape and will peel off a little bit easier and is designed to not damage things. This part can be a little bit tricky, so just make sure you take your time. Start by cutting the excess tape off of your toe pattern so you're just left with the shape that you want. We need to get this part to lay flat, so we're going to cut into the curved shape in a few places. I like to cut a large dart right at the center front marking that we made, or you can cut the entire thing in half at the center and create a seam. It doesn't matter which one you do, it's just a style choice. If it still has a lot of curve in it like this one did, you'll need to cut smaller darts on either side of the center cut. Once it feels pretty flat, carefully press the tape onto a piece of paper. You may notice when you do this that your tape still has a little bit of curve in it, but as long as it's just a little bit, it doesn't matter. Now you're going to add seam allowance to all the edges of your pieces except for the darts. Just trace the edge of those. I add a 1/4 inch of seam allowance. A 1/4 inch is the most convenient for me because that's the width of my machine's presser foot, so I can just use the edge of the foot as a stitch guide. This is where you can see that the clear ruler helps a lot, but you can do it with any ruler. Now you can trace your pattern pieces onto your outer fabric. Make sure that you transfer all the markings you made. These will really help line everything up as you sew. After the pieces are cut, I also like to add some marks identifying which side of the piece will be on the inside or outside edge of the shoe. This helps so I don't pair the pieces up wrong. When I sew my shoe cover, I only like to cut the outer fabric and I leave the vinyl uncut. If you don't like the way that I'm doing this or it looks weird to you, you can go ahead and cut out your vinyl as well. You'll just want to use more pins. Using the edge of my presser foot against the edge of the fabric, I sew the two pieces together at the bottom of the platform piece. If your presser foot isn't a 1/4 inch, you can mark the backside of your fabric before you sew to give yourself a guide. Next, you'll need to clip the curve of your bottom edge. Use some scissors to make little slices in the seam allowance, being careful not to cut into your stitches. Doing this helps your curve lay flat when the pieces of fabric are flipped around to the right side. Top stitching is totally optional, but I do think it makes the finished piece look really crisp and professional. Sewing from the right side of your fabric, you want to sew a line of stitches along the inside edge of your seam. The goal of doing this is to stitch the seam allowance down flat against the back of your lining piece. It's a small detail that just adds a little extra finish to your work. I like to then pin the layers together at the top and add a basting stitch to make sewing the platform piece to the toe piece a little bit easier later. Then I'll repeat the same process for the top edge of the toe. Sewing the top edge together, flipping it over to top stitch if you want, and then lining up the bottom edges and basting them together. As I'm basting the bottom edge of the toe, I'm going to carefully use my stitches to trace the edges of the darts that I drew onto the fabric. Once your darts are traced and the bottom edge is basted, fold your toe along the center of each dart and do your best to line up the lines of stitching marking your darts. If you sew just to the outside of the stitch marks on your darts, once it's flipped around you shouldn't be able to see them, but it is really hard to line up these darts, and my marking stitches did still show a little bit, so I just used a seam ripper to pull them out. Now it's time to sew the toe to the platform piece. You should have 3 marks on the top edge of your platform, the center, and then where the edges of the toe will line up. I remarked mine with pins because this fabric makes them really hard to see. Since the dart on the toe is now the middle of the toe, line that up with the middle marking on your platform piece. Then pin the outer edges of the toe to the platform, and then you'll need to distribute anything in between those pins as evenly as you can. Sometimes, because we're trying to attach a curve to a piece that's flat, there can be a little extra, so just do your best to pin it out evenly so that you don't end up with ripples. Now we're just going to sew those 2 pieces together, but go slowly. The fabric is going to be really thick in certain places, and definitely pull your pins out as you go. Even if you're not the type of person that does that, it's just a lot for your machine to handle, and if it also hits a pin, you're definitely going to break a needle. So now all that's left is that unfinished top edge on either side of the toe. I like to just fold that over and stitch it down, sewing the seam allowance of the toe and the platform down as well, as I just stitch along the top of the platform portion. The last bit is to sew a piece of extra wide elastic to the back edges of your cover. It can be hard to determine how long of a piece to cut, so I typically measure how wide of a gap I have on the back of the platform, and I'll cut the elastic a ½ inch shorter than that. When you include that 1/4 inch seam allowance that's going to get sewn out, the piece of elastic ends up being 1 inch shorter total than the gap, and that seems to be a good amount so that you're still able to get the cover on, but it's tight enough that it doesn't fall off. As you can see, I didn't even have elastic tall enough to fit this platform, so I just centered what I did have in between the edges before sewing it in. It can be really hard to find this wide elastic, so you could also experiment with sewing a few pieces of 1 inch elastic side by side, or maybe sewing in a strip of spandex. I have not tried either of those myself, but I don't see any reason why it wouldn't work. Slide that shoe cover on, and now your expensive pole dancing shoes are protected, and you can mess up your covers and then just wash them or make another pair. I've made several pairs of these for a few different shoes, and I love them. They look like part of the shoe, so I don't mind leaving them on all the time, and they're so much easier to wash or replace when they get dirty. As you can see, the first pair that I made has taken a huge beating off of the toe of my suede pleasers. If you found this tutorial helpful or use it to make some shoe covers for yourself, please let me know. It makes my day when someone leaves a comment or tags me on Instagram showing off their work. Thanks so much for watching. Bye!